Welcome to Climate Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodness from our TEDxLondon experts in under 5 minutes.
In this week's Climate Curious, we speak with a marine biologist who is quite literally living the dream. Since he specialises in restoring coral reefs, Fijian citizen Austin Bowden-Kerby spends a lot of his time scuba diving in the Pacific Islands. Austin shares an incredible story about how the discovery of supercorals are helping communities repopulate their dwindling coral reefs with stronger, more resilient strains, which can help withstand hotter water temperatures caused by climate change. Over to Austin in conversation with TEDxLondon's Ashley Brown. Stay curious.
So Austin, thank you so much for joining us on this Climate Quickie. I wondered if we could start off by hearing a bit more about who you are and what you do.
I'm Austin Bowden-Kerby. I live in Fiji. I'm a Fiji citizen now. I was raised in the South Pacific most of my life. Also lived in the Caribbean about 6 years. So my specialty is coral reef restoration and coral reef adaptation to climate change. I have a PhD, a master's, a bachelor's of science. But what's amazing is that I'm actually autistic and I wasn't a very good student, but it has given me a superpower to do things that other people haven't been able to recognize the importance of, or even recognize them in the big picture. So as I was raised in villages and living among villages in the Pacific, I have a very close relationship with communities and with the ocean and with fishing. And I saw the reefs were getting smashed by dynamite fishing in some of the places I was living. And I saw they weren't recovering. So I started turning my attention to why weren't they recovering and how can we accelerate their natural recovery processes. I've been doing this since the late 80s, really, looking at repairing damage, like from cyclones and dynamite and so forth. And now something much more sinister has happened, and it's called coral bleaching.
Can you tell us a bit more about why people should care about coral?
The fish live in the corals. They live in the holes in the corals. The tiny little blue fish live in the branches, little black and white fish, and they're hiding there. They're like a little cloud over the coral, and they're eating plankton in the water, and they go and hide in the coral, and they're helping the corals. The corals actually like the fish. The fish actually help them to grow, and then the corals give them a home, and that's the foundation of the very food chain. So if the corals are gone, where will the fish live? The coral reef fish certainly won't live there. And all these people in the island nations, they won't have a food source. That's their primary protein. Corals are extremely important. We need corals, and they're very, very sensitive to climate change. So they're the only creature in this planet that is both stone, plant, and animal. And it's just a miracle.
And can you tell us a bit more about the current situation with coral here in the Pacific Islands where you're working?
Oh boy, we're in big trouble. The coral reefs, they're not doing so well. About half of them already have gone, and we're doing our best to manage what's left. And we made some real good progress in making no fishing areas where the fish could be free of fishing pressure, because fish are so important in coral health. We've cleaned up the waters in many places, and things were really improving. And now climate change has reared its ugly head, and much of the progress has been swept away. The hot water is causing a breakdown in the photosynthesis process, and corals are dying of what's called bleaching. So the corals become white because the algae leave. So the corals are already about half are dead. And it's really getting bad because climate change is accelerating. And right now, the reason I'm in Tuvalu is there's a massive body of hot water. The ocean itself is 31 degrees. And the lagoons, when that 31 degree water comes to these lagoons, it will get as hot as 34 or 35. And that hot water was just in the Caribbean. And there were places of the Caribbean that got to 38 degrees. And even the fish died. And this is what climate change is doing to our world. It's cooking the coral reefs, and it's killing them. And all of these island peoples, their whole future is jeopardized. The entire nation built by coral is jeopardized. Tuvalu and Kiribati and the Maldives, all these islands, the Marshalls, Tokelau Islands, so many island nations that were built by coral reefs, they're jeopardized. And it's not our fault. We didn't cause that to happen. And we're the recipients of this horrible climate change that the people in the developed world are really responsible for.
How do you stay positive, and what gives you hope for the future?
Oh boy, I do have hope. Instead of focusing on all the dead corals that you see, I realized, well, look at what's surviving. And that gives me hope, because there are corals that are extremely strong and they can survive at 34 degrees, 35 degrees. You have to move those heat adapted corals that can survive to 35. We've got to get out and into cooler waters. And that's what gives me hope, is we have a whole bunch of kids here, young people, who want to help. They want to move their corals to cooler water, and they want to rescue these super corals. We call them super corals, right? So we're mobilizing, and that gives me hope. And also the fact that last time on the severe bleaching, we had a lot of survivors. So even in this massive heat wave, we will have survivors and we will have hope. And so at the end of this heat wave, we will go back out and we'll say, oh, here's one that didn't bleach, it didn't die. And we'll take a sample of that, because what we found is after a big bleaching, they're so far apart from each other, they can't make babies. So we get them close together to spawn, and then there'll be fertilization. And these millions of coral babies will go out and they'll be super babies, right? Because they're from super corals. And so Mother Nature is able to adapt to climate change, I feel in my heart. But in the past, we might have had hundreds of years to adapt, and now we only have decades. That's why we need to help.
If our listeners wanted to find out more about coral conservation or take action or get involved, do you have any recommendations for where they can find out more?
Well, if they want to learn more about what we're doing for climate change adaptation for coral reefs and for restoration of coral reefs, they can go to coralsforconservation.org, corals4conservation.org. If you're interested in helping, just open your eyes and do what makes your heart feel good. And we need your help. The world needs your help. Mother Earth needs all of us to rise up.
Thanks again so much for taking some time out of your busy coral saving schedule to speak to us today. We really appreciate you.
It's been quite fun.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our superstar podcast team at TEDxLondon. Until next time,
Stay curious.